Due to the video game industry being a monopoly when it comes to generating revenue, most great ideas that garner a large following are followed up upon with a sequel, a new game to capitalize on it and make the company more money. However, some games don't end up getting the sequel treatment, like the 10 games that I'm going to be focusing on within this video. There are two main reasons for why the 10 games that I plan on talking about today haven't gotten a sequel yet. Number one, they're probably a relatively new title and haven't gotten a sequel yet because there hasn't been enough time to properly develop one, and reason number two is a little more broad. There are extenuating circumstances as to why the company didn't want to follow up with this specific game. It could be due to lackluster sales, it could be due to the quality of the game not being very good, etc, etc. But the 10 games that I'm going to be talking about today could definitely work very well on the Nintendo Switch in terms of the control scheme and adapting well to the console, and there's also lots of requests for each of these games to get a sequel to follow up upon them. Sequels are usually reserved for games that are so good and fans just want a little bit more of them, or sequels are somewhat necessary if the original game contains some flaws, but the core idea is really good, so that if the game is changed up a bit in some ways, then it could end up being a really good product. And with that all being said, let's get right into the list. Here are 10 Nintendo games that I think definitely deserve a sequel on the Switch. Generally, for number 10 spots on my list, I try to choose a more conventional or generic topic that most people would agree with, just to start us off on a lighter tone, but today I'm delving into something a little more wacky for the number 10 spots. And this is a sequel to Super Princess Peach. This game, which was released in 2005 on the Nintendo DS, stars the Princess Peach in a 2D Mario platformer, and why do I think this game definitely needs a sequel and could work pretty well on the Nintendo Switch? Well, there are many reasons for this, mainly stemming from the situation concerning 2D Mario games going on right now. As I've focused on in previous videos, there's not really too much potential for a standard 2D Mario game to be released again on the Nintendo Switch, considering that last year we already got New Super Mario Bros. U, New Super Luigi U, and Super Mario Maker 2 all released. So this not only covers the basis for a generic 2D Mario game, a more challenging version of that game, as well as a level creator tool. So if there's going to be a new 2D Mario game on the Switch, it has to innovate, it has to be unique. And when it comes to unique 2D Mario platformers, one that definitely comes to mind is Super Princess Peach for the DS. This game definitely has a cult following, which is leading to some people requesting for a sequel for it, and it's mainly due to the emotion concept that's the primary unique component of the gameplay. It involves tapping on the DS touchscreen to change Peach's emotion at will, and this will grant her new abilities, and you'll be able to solve puzzles based on the certain emotion that you're using. When it comes to putting this game on the Nintendo Switch, you wouldn't necessarily need the touchscreen to do this. You could probably just assign the emotions to different buttons and be able to change them that way, and just focus on watching Princess Peach move around the screen instead of requiring a second screen for the gameplay. It would be also interesting to see Peach star in a Mario game again. She's been playable in more recent Mario titles, some main ones like Super Mario 3D World for example, but she hasn't really had too much of a starring role other than in Super Princess Peach, where it's mainly just her that's the focus. In most of the mainline Mario titles, like Super Mario Odyssey for example, Peach's main role is to be kidnapped by Bowser and serves as a figure for Mario to strive to save throughout the experience. But in Super Princess Peach, she is actually the one that you're playing as, and she's the solo character for it, which is kind of cool. Coming in at the number 9 spot on this list, we have Oasis. A couple years ago when this game released, it was a relatively surprising title that was announced. Most people didn't really know what this game was going to be, and it ended up being a fun dungeon crawler town building experience. Despite the game not selling very well, which is probably the main detriment for it getting a sequel, Oasis does have a pretty decent sized cult following, which is why there's many requests for it to be getting a sequel, and that would be on the Nintendo Switch. I can't really see the control scheme of Oasis being solely linked to the 3DS to the point that it's not possible to bring it over to the Nintendo Switch. I don't think it's completely geared to that console. And despite it having a decent sized fan base who love the game, there are also many improvements that could be made to the original Oasis in a sequel. I know many people didn't really care for the dungeon skill system within the game and how there's certain required skills later on in the game and you have to change out your characters for it, and it definitely seems kind of annoying at those certain points. But if you were able to fix that as well as some of the other minute issues within the game, I think we could definitely be primed for another great title that could be released on the Switch. I don't know what would have to be done with the marketing of Ever Oasis for it to be able to succeed, considering that if the original game doesn't succeed, then it's probably not very likely that an Ever Oasis 2 would blow sales out of the water. But who knows, with the right marketing campaign, maybe something could get done here. Coming in at the number 8 spot on this list, we have Donkey Kong 64. This is a highly requested title to get a sequel, and many people are surprised as to why it hasn't. This is a collectathon game released on the Nintendo 64, and yes, it is a 3D platformer involving Donkey Kong characters. Most of the unique and wacky Donkey Kong characters that you've seen throughout that universe have originated from Donkey Kong 64, and it's really added more depth to the characters of the Donkey Kong franchise. There are some people who would not really be on board with a sequel to this game, considering that Donkey Kong 64 is relatively controversial, and some people didn't really care for it as much. It's a collectathon that tends to go a little overboard, but I think this could be fixed if it's toned down a little bit with a sequel. If they tone down a little bit on going overboard with the collectathon aspects and just make it a general 3D platformer collectathon, then I think most people would be more happy with Donkey Kong 64, or whatever they end up calling the sequel to this game. We already have a 2D Donkey Kong game released on the Nintendo Switch. Then again, this is a Wii U port of Tropical Freeze with some slight new content added in, so we could go that same route and introduce a new 2D Donkey Kong title on the Nintendo Switch, but I think it would be very interesting to bring back the 3D Donkey Kong series and see what could be done with it. Coming in at the number 7 spot is a very infamous title to Nintendo fans within the GameCube era. This is Eternal Darkness. This is a horror action adventure game that was originally in development for the Nintendo 64, but had its development later changed towards the GameCube. It released in 2002, and its gameplay is relatively similar to Resident Evil, although it does have some slight changes. This is a first-party Nintendo game, which is really interesting considering the nature of the game, and it's definitely geared more towards an adult audience, and I think it's partially because of that the game wasn't commercially successful. Nintendo's success, in my opinion, comes a lot from its willingness to market their games towards a broad demographic. They have some games mainly marketed at kids, but there's a lot of depth to certain games that would appeal to adults. And it's because they appeal to a wide variety of people. So many types of people could go and play their games, but when it comes to a title such as Eternal Darkness, it doesn't really fit with the theme of many other titles, like The Legend of Zelda, for example, a series that could be experienced and enjoyed by people of any age, whereas Eternal Darkness is mainly focused towards an adult demographic. That bars a lot of people that probably own a Nintendo console from going to buy that game. But nevertheless, the quality of the game was received very well from some people, leading to many requests for a sequel. There was a sequel of Eternal Darkness planned to be in development, but that ended up being scrapped. And then there was a crowdfunding project for a spiritual successor to Eternal Darkness, and that didn't end up panning out either. So a lot of requests for this game to be brought back in terms of a sequel haven't really panned out, but hopefully something could work out for those people. And considering that Nintendo is focusing a little bit more on implementing some mature games in the eShop for the Switch, then maybe we could have Eternal Darkness come in that form. Coming in at the number 6 spot on this list is Kirby Airride. We have another GameCube title here, and if you're a Kirby fan and hasn't heard of this title, wait till I blow your mind and telling you that a Kirby racing game was released during this time. In 2003, this was developed by HAL, and yes, it is a racing game starring Kirby. You could either face off against computer-controlled AI, or you could play in multiplayer with up to 4 players. While the game did receive mixed reception from critics, there is a cult following of this game and many people who really enjoyed it because of the unique concept. Kirby games are generally platformers, most of them in a 2D environment, but when you throw Kirby and some other characters in there in a racing format of a game, things go off the rail and it's really unique. While the gameplay is a little bit too simplistic for some people, if there was a sequel to this game made, you could enhance the gameplay a little bit more and add some more depth. And over time, the Kirby series has added more and more characters to it, so you could potentially implement those into Kirby Airride, and you could have a wide cast of playable characters for people to choose and play as. Also with the Nintendo Switch Online service, this would be another title that could help promote that. Certainly there's already around 15 million people using the online service. This could even be further incentive to go and purchase Nintendo Switch Online by being able to play this racing game with your friends. Would this game compete with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe? I mean, if you look at the sales of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, I don't think there's really much at all that could compete with it. This would just be a side racing game and would probably feature different styles of gameplay so that Mario Kart's success wouldn't really be conflicting with this game and would kind of appeal to its own demographic. Coming in at the number 5 spot on this list, we have Golden Sun Dark Dawn. Now, if you've watched my videos on games that deserve a remake, you'll know that I mentioned the original Golden Sun is definitely one that could use a remake to sort of revive the Golden Sun series and reintroduce it to people. But if there's a game in the Golden Sun series that definitely deserves a sequel, it would be the most recent entry in the series, 2010's Dark Dawn for the DS. Now, I think it's mainly due to diminishing sales that we haven't gotten a new Golden Sun game in a long time, but Dark Dawn ended on a cliffhanger, and an RPG that ends on a cliffhanger definitely needs to be followed up upon in the eyes of the fans. And is there more of a better time to do it than now on the Nintendo Switch? Yeah, it's going to be a long time since the last one was released, but the Golden Sun fanbase has been very vocal online in their support for a new game in the series to be released, or a remake of an older game. And if they were to launch the Golden Sun series, relaunch it again with Dark Dawn 2, or whatever they end up calling the sequel to this game, and continue upon the original story that it established, this would make a lot of those people happy, and potentially there would be an uproar online of support for this game, and then it would gain some more popularity, spiral from there, many people would go and buy this game, and then the Golden Sun series could be revived, and we could potentially be getting more games in that series. Again, if they were to remake the original Golden Sun, that could potentially work, but if they are going to make a new title, I definitely think it has to be the follow-up to Dark Dawn, considering that the game ended on a cliffhanger, and when a game does that, the story generally needs to be followed up upon, because why would you end it on a cliffhanger if you don't plan on making a new game at all? Coming in at the number 4 spot on this list, we have Super Mario RPG. This game, which was released on the SNES, and it actually introduced pseudo 3D graphics to the Mario series, albeit not actually 3D, that was reserved for Super Mario 64, but I bet you get what I mean here with the unique art style that this game provided in the SNES era. And it's definitely a treasured cult classic to many Nintendo fans. They remember some of the characters from this game. Geno ended up being really iconic from Super Mario RPG, and actually has a lot of people requesting for him to be in the roster of Super Smash Bros. To the point where Sakurai has had to acknowledge him and say that he doesn't really plan on including him, and he included a Mii costume for him and all that. But the fact that the fan support got to that level for Geno means that there's a lot of people who love Super Mario RPG, and this is definitely a game that could use a remake for people to try and experience it again. But I even think a sequel could potentially be much better for Super Mario RPG. Most of the other Mario RPG series that followed Super Mario RPG, like Paper Mario and Mario and Luigi, have had sequels to the original games in their respective series, but not the original. And because of the wide array of unique and quirky characters introduced in Super Mario RPG and the great story that was involved inside of it, I definitely think it could use a sequel. Now, in terms of the practical application of this sequel and it actually being created, I don't know how likely this is, considering that there's a collaboration with Square Enix, and while Nintendo and Square have been working pretty well together with the inclusion of Cloud and Hero and Super Smash Bros., I don't know if that's necessarily going to translate into creating a sequel for Super Mario RPG. I don't necessarily know the logistics of whether Nintendo would be able to create one on their own without the help of Square and be able to include some of the characters from the original in it. I don't know necessarily if Nintendo has the legal rights to do that, but if they do, then this would definitely be a great idea to put on the Nintendo Switch, especially considering that the Mario and Luigi series is in jeopardy right now. Coming in at the number 3 spot on this list, we have Xenoblade Chronicles X. The final 3 entries in this video are going to be relatively newer titles, so it's unsurprising as to why these games haven't received a sequel as of yet, because they've come out within the last few years, and potentially the sequel is still in development. And when it comes to Xenoblade Chronicles X, as I've mentioned in recent videos, I have little doubt in my mind that this game is going to be receiving a sequel. Xenoblade Chronicles X, like the aforementioned Golden Sun Dark Dawn, ends on a cliffhanger. I'm not going to be spoiling the story of the game and what the cliffhanger is and whatnot, but it does end on one, meaning that a X2, a Xenoblade Y, XX, whatever you'd want to call it, would probably have to be released on the Nintendo Switch. Considering that Nintendo is releasing a remake of the original Xenoblade Chronicles this year, then I don't think it's very reasonable to expect that Xenoblade Chronicles X2 would be releasing this year. And if Nintendo wants to port Xenoblade Chronicles X over, then I think it wouldn't even be released next year and would potentially have to be released in 2022 or something like that. But regardless, I definitely think Xenoblade Chronicles X will be getting a sequel in the future. This game is relatively polarizing to the Xenoblade fanbase. I think the reaction to it is generally positive, but when you have an RPG that has a silent protagonist, things do get a little dicey. There are people who like the more open-ended exploration end of Xenoblade Chronicles X compared to the other Xenoblade games. While they do have a lot of exploration in them, Xenoblade Chronicles X focuses more on that, but due to the silent protag, the story is kind of hindered, and if that's the main reason that you play Xenoblade, then this one might not be for you. But the original Xenoblade got a sequel, so I don't see why Xenoblade Chronicles X won't get a sequel as well. Coming in at the number 2 spot on this list, we have Kid Icarus Uprising. Man, you want to talk polarizing games? This is definitely one of them. Again, like Xenoblade Chronicles X, I do believe the reaction to Kid Icarus Uprising is relatively positive. When it was released in 2013 and developed by Masahiro Sakurai, this game definitely has a Super Smash Bros. Vibe in terms of the menu, but that's really where the similarities stop. There's two main forms of this game actually being played. There's this on-rails aspect, and then there's a grounded aspect where you could run around, defeat enemies, and all this other fun stuff. The game can be pretty fun, but the controls are relatively off-putting to some people. The game even had to be included with a peripheral in some cases for you to be able to stand your 3DS on it to be able to move around with the stylus and whatnot. But if a sequel to Kid Icarus Uprising were to be released, I doubt that the control scheme would be a big issue for it. You would have to get rid of the touchscreen entirely, meaning that you'd rely on the Joy-Cons for controls mostly, or a Pro Controller or something like that. So you wouldn't have to worry about the awkward stand and the positions that you're going to be placing your arms while playing this game. I don't think Sakurai is really interested in doing a sequel to Kid Icarus Uprising, but maybe Nintendo could get some other development team to do one and follow up on what was a great game that lacked a suitable control scheme for many people. This game could potentially be successful on the Nintendo Switch as well with the right marketing campaign. It just depends on how they decide to do it. And coming in at the number 1 spot on this list, I doubt this game being put here is going to surprise anybody, but this is Super Mario Odyssey getting a sequel, and this would be Super Mario Odyssey 2. This game is probably the most likely game on this list to get a sequel, I feel. Xenoblade Chronicles X is a close second, but this game I definitely could see getting a sequel. It's not necessarily the story that I believe has to be followed up upon, although there is potential there. It's just the general positive reaction to Super Mario Odyssey, people feeling that it's reviving the sandbox-style Mario titles, and there's definitely some potential to fix some issues with it in a sequel, as I've gone over in depth in some previous videos. There's some famous enemies like the Boo and the Bob-omb that were included in previous Mario games, but were surprisingly absent from Super Mario Odyssey. In fact, I have an entire list of 10 enemies that were absent from Super Mario Odyssey for one reason or another. Could these enemies potentially be saved for a Super Mario Odyssey sequel? Is that the reason why they weren't included in the original? Some people feel it's way too easy to get moons, and for myself, I definitely feel that way. I think it should be a little more challenging to get certain moons, and while some are definitely challenging, there's many that are sitting out there in the open. Now, Nintendo says this is mainly due to a design decision to have Super Mario Odyssey be a game that you could just pick up, play for a few minutes, get a couple moons, and then put it down. But that's not generally how I like to play my 3D Mario titles. So for my personal taste, I would say that I'd prefer to have all the moons have some relatively challenging aspects to them. This would probably mean for Nintendo to have to include fewer moons, and yeah, that would probably be fine. We don't need 999 of them in the game. That's an incredibly inflated number because there's not 999 unique missions in Super Mario Odyssey to get these moons. But regardless, Super Mario Odyssey is a great Mario title. It sold great. Breath of the Wild's getting a sequel. I don't see why Odyssey's not going to get one as well. There's other possibilities Nintendo could go with for 3D Marios on the Switch, but I think Odyssey 2 is definitely one of the frontrunners here, and that's why it tops the list at the number 1 spot. In terms of some Nintendo games that I think deserve a remake on the Switch, I have made a list about that as well, which you can check out. The link's on the screen right now. Check out some other videos that I have for you, and consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon so that you don't miss any new Nintendo content coming your way very soon. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.